Welcome back to my channel for a very special episode on smartphone photography. And the session is special because I will unbox the Xiaomi 12S Ultra, which is co-engineered with Leica. And that is a very special phone, very interesting for photographers, and is only available in China at this point in time. But it came in mail to me this week, so we are going to unbox it in the first part. In the second part, I'm going to look into the photography features, and in the third part, we are going to shoot it and judge about image quality and if the promise is kept that this is a Leica camera in a smartphone. Let's get started. The box in which the Xiaomi 12S Ultra is shipped has a minimalistic design and nothing less we expect from Leica. So there's not much written on the box except what it contains, and then here is a lot of information about some of the features we are going to look into, but most of the engravings and the text is in Chinese. And this phone in this version for the Chinese market is capable of only Chinese and English, and that will be good enough for me because I have all my gadgets set up in English anyway. So let's open the box and let's see what's inside. The box came sealed in plastic, but I removed the plastic already, but did not yet open the box because I wanted to make this a live experience for you guys on my channel. So let's try to get it open, which is sometimes a bit tricky, but we'll work our way through here. Yes, progress. All right, here we go. So here is the first tiny little box in here. I guess, because I read the specs in the web, of course, that's a case. And indeed, if you look at that here, there is a little brochure about the phone, which is all in Chinese, very helpful for me. And then here, of course, we have the case, minimalistic, but it will protect the phone in an effective way. And you see here already the huge spare out for the camera system, which is so promising. So let's have a look at the phone. And here we go. We'll look at the design in a moment, but what catches our attention immediately here, of course, is the huge camera system. And this phone has a very large sensor. We'll come to the specs in a moment, and a lot of optical features built into it, coming from that cooperation from Leica with Xiaomi. And I guess the reason why they now focus on Xiaomi is because on Huawei, which had Leica cameras for quite some years, there was actually this ban from the US, which did no longer allow Huawei to incorporate the Google Play Store. And for a lot of smartphone users, this is a showstopper. And here now we get, hopefully, the best camera system in a smartphone as of today. And we'll look into all of that, of course, in a moment. Let's see if there is anything else in the box here. There is just a charger. It's 67 watt. This has a fast charging property, this phone. And then we have a USB cable here. And let's have a look here. That's what I feared. It's USB-C to USB-A is not what I like because my world is completely on USB-C, in particular as a MacBook user. But who cares? We have adapters, we have cables which will fit. So all good at this front. Before I insert my SIM card and then get the phone into the case for protection, let's quickly talk about design. And what I like in particular, and of course saw in the web in the announcement about this phone, is this is the first smartphone backside where you don't have a smudgy fingerprint collector. And that's because there is some finish here, which is very nice and very nicely made. You also have here Xiaomi. You have here on the camera system Leica, so that no one overlooks that this massive camera system is from Leica. You have here at the bottom the usual ports, so USB-C, SIM card slot. You have a good sound system, which is indicated here by Harman Kardon.
Premium sound is the marriage of art and technology. From elegant and sophisticated speakers to the simple splendor of luxury automobile sound systems, Harman Kardon have been committed to pursuing perfect sound quality for 67 years.
And it's actually a very nice, in a very fine way built smartphone. And I like in particular the texture and finish here, that you don't have a fingerprint collector on the backside of your smartphone. So that's quite nice. There seems to be some coating on the camera system which prevents from fingerprints becoming sticky. So you see here, if I go with my finger over that finish here, there are no traces of my fingerprint, and that is something which I also in particular like. I've now inserted my SIM card and I also put the phone into the case. The case unfortunately is not resistant against fingerprints, but it's for protection only, so it will be fine. Nothing to be worried about. And I also applied an anti-glare, anti-fingerprint sticker here, a display protector on the phone, because it's curved here on the glass. And if it lays on this side, it's actually protected if I have the sticker on, and it also gives me a better read and less reflections. And since this is curved, there is at this point in time no optimal display protector here, but this one actually is from a Huawei phone and fits quite well. So I think there is nothing to complain at this point in time. I'm actually ready to boot it up, start it, and to go into the features of the camera system, which is what we are all interested in most, of course. So I've set up the phone, and let's address the elephant in the room first. And the question is, if this is a smartphone from China, does it have Google Play Store? And in order to use Google apps from the Play Store, you need to have Google Play services. And there is a fundamental difference between the Xiaomi and the current Huawei phones, where Google Play Store is no longer available, and people need to jailbreak it to get Google Play and the apps they bought before back on the phone. When I booted the phone for the first time, Google Play Store was not available, and there were all kinds of Chinese app stores which were completely useless to me. Now the Play Store is here, and it's working fine. As you can see, I can install all my apps which I purchased before. There's absolutely no restriction and no discounting going on here. And the difference between the Xiaomi phones and the Huawei phones is that these phones out of the box have the option to activate Google Play services. And that is something you find in the menu here. So if you go down here to accounts, and that's here, then you find here basic Google services. And that is something which was on the phone right before. All I had to do is activate it here. So it was not activated before, now it's activated. And then I could download from a secure and safe place the Google Play Store APK, and it all worked fine. So I basically was able to transform this phone from a Chinese smartphone only into a European smartphone with all the features, all the apps and everything I have. And important to know is that if you have out of the box in the firmware already Google Play services available, you don't have to jailbreak the phone. And on the Huawei side, if you do that and jailbreak it, it's a bit risky because you never know what you let into the phone and how people are spying on you or what type of malware you're getting in addition to what you only wanted. So here it's working fine and all my apps are there. You see this here, everything is here. All my apps which I purchased over the last many years, I was able to install and they all work fine on this Xiaomi phone. So without any traces of still existing Chinese apps and Chinese app stores and a Chinese keyboard and all of that, and without jailbreaking the phone, which is an important add-on here, I have now a phone as if this phone would be made for Europe. All my apps are here. If you look here, I have installed a German keyboard and it's all working without any flaws, and I'm really happy about that phone. Also, the 5G network works out of the box. You don't see it here because I have my SIM card currently in the Samsung Galaxy Fold 4, which I'm testing out. But I used before the SIM card in that phone and it had strong signal on a 5G. So you also have all the speed on the internet, which you want to have on a phone like this. The reason why I was so interested in this phone is the Leica camera ensemble here. And I want to quickly go through the specs and indicate what we can expect from that camera. Then I want to mount it on a tripod and in the studio quickly go through some of the settings and further features, and then we go out for shooting and we look into image quality, dynamic range, resolution, all of these type of things which I also look into on the professional cameras I typically show on my channel. So let's get this started. Let's look into the specs and then let's move on with the video. We already looked into the sensor, and the sensor is from Sony and is an IMX989 and is the same sensor as what we find in the very capable compact camera Sony RX100 Mark VII, which is a 1-inch type sensor, but the true dimensions are actually 13.1 times 9.8 millimeter when it comes to sensor size. And if based on the diagonal of a full frame sensor and the diagonal of this 1-inch type sensor, we calculate the crop factor, we get a crop factor of 2.7 give or take. This, for a smartphone unusually large sensor, is powered, and the whole phone of course is powered, by a flagship Snapdragon 8 Plus Generation 1 chipset, which is the best you can currently have in a smartphone. Leica lenses belong to the best lenses in the world, and their know-how did fully come into play when Xiaomi together with Leica developed the camera system for the 12S Ultra. And very important of course also on the software side, firmware side, everything that finally drives and steers the camera, let's say, very important, color science or Adobe Camera Raw, the way images are processed, the color representation, the monochrome settings, all that has the bundled footprint of what Leica brings to the table based on their long tradition and history in photography, camera, lenses and manufacturing of top-notch photography gear. The camera system is a triple system and we have 50 megapixel on the main camera. We come to the specs in a second. 48 megapixel on the ultra-wide angle lens and also 48 megapixel on the telephoto lens. The main camera with 50 megapixel and that 1-inch type sensor underlying has an equivalent focal length to full frame of 23 millimeter. About the sensor we spoke about, the pixel pitch is 3.2 micrometer, but after a tetra binning, which means 4 pixels are combined into one, which boils down on the resolution side then from 50 megapixel to 12.5 megapixel. And we have a fixed aperture of f1.9. Whenever you change software side an aperture setting, it's just simulation and software is not a hardware. These type of smartphone lenses, they have fixed apertures. We have optical image stabilization and we have face detection autofocus, which makes the autofocus super quick and super speedy. The ultra-wide angle lens with 48 megapixel has a full frame equivalent focal length of 13 millimeter and 128 degree field of view, and that is super wide of course and very convenient for landscape. It has a fixed aperture of f2.2. It has dual face detection, autofocus, and a 48 megapixel telephoto lens is in full frame equivalent terms 120 millimeter field of view. It has a 1/2 inch sensor and it has optical image stabilization, of course, in the telephoto setting. That's super convenient. What we also see is that the luxury of a large 1-inch sensor is reserved for the main camera only, and the ultra-wide angle lens as well as the telephoto lens, they have a 1/2 inch sensor, so smaller. And you also, I think, see this to some extent in the images. Nevertheless, this is still a large sensor size for a smartphone. There would be so many more things to tell and share about the Xiaomi 12S Ultra, and you find all the data points on the global website now. Just a week ago it was only on the Chinese website, now it's on the global website of Xiaomi, and you can look this all up. And I want to rather go now into the native camera app on the phone, talk a little bit about the options we have there and the capabilities, and then go into a shooting and most importantly look into sample images. The native camera app of the 12S Ultra is really well done, but not that different from what you find for instance on a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra or on a Huawei P50 Pro. What I will do now is I will activate here the screen recorder, and then we have a screen recording of the 12S Ultra, which makes it much easier for me and more space filling to actually show you some of the features. We have different sections here. So we have a video section with the usual suspects here in the settings. We can activate HDR or deactivate it. We have here video stabilization. One is the steady video mode and the other one is the steady video pro mode. And that's all pretty nice. Also works quite well. And we have here different color filters we can apply. And in the settings, I have currently set this to 4K with 60 frames per second, but we can also go here to 8K and then we get 24 frames per second. So that's quite nice and actually is super sophisticated in the same way as we see it on other smartphone flagships from other manufacturers. If we move on to the photo section here, we have here something very special, and they have two settings which also pop up at the beginning when you open the camera app for the first time. And we have here a color calibration which is called Leica Vibrant, but we can also go to Leica Authentic. And as I said before, Leica's know-how on color science has fully been incorporated into that smartphone camera system, and that is quite nice of course. We also can deactivate HDR, and currently if you activate it, it's in an auto mode, and if HDR is activated, which is not the case or seems not to be the case here in the studio, then HDR actually turns from white letters into red letters. We also can have AI support, and that is helpful of course in the recognition of subjects and supports the camera. I typically have this off because it is an additional feature which people might want to use, but I'm not necessarily using here. We also have a flash setting, which is the same as on other smartphones, and then we have settings. And in the settings here, I'm currently at a 3:4 aspect ratio. Here you can activate a self timer. We have different things we can use here, like voice shutter. We have a macro setting, but it's all computational photography, so not super exciting for me as a pro photographer. We can have grid lines and all of that, and we also can get a movie frame. So there are different settings you can tweak here. The most interesting part of the native camera app is actually the Pro section. And in the Pro section, you also see immediately here popping up RAW. So that means we store our images here in the RAW format, and it's Adobe RAW. And you will later see in Lightroom how I process these images and what a nice dynamic range, sharpness, and in general image quality we get out of that phone. We also can here calibrate contrast, sharpness, saturation, and so on. We have here metering. So currently here we can go to frame average. We can also go here to spot metering. And I also have here center weighted metering, which is the same as what you find in Leica cameras, of course. And then what's really cool is, of course, the manual settings here on the sideline. And in the manual settings, for instance, you can choose the lens. So here we have the wide area lens. We can also go into the 5x telezoom. And it also recognizes the face here, back to wide angle lens, and then the ultra wide angle lens, which gives us then this very wide field of view of 128 degrees, which we just saw in the specs of the camera system. We also can here, of course, tweak now our exposure compensation. We can tweak this down or can get it up by as many stops as we want. That's quite nice. Let's bring this back to 0. And we also can tweak the ISO value. Currently, A is activated, which stands for automatic, but the moment in time I push up the slider, I get here to much higher ISO values, but currently that's compensated by the shutter speed, so you don't see anything. So let's maybe keep this at 200 ISO. Let's go to the shutter speed, which is also in an A mode, so automatic, and let's start to play with the shutter speed. And then you see really the effect, and you can combine and tweak your parameters now, like you typically have in the light triangle between, ISO and shutter speed, and the aperture, of course, here is fixed. We also can manually focus if we want. Currently also in autofocus, but you see here how I can tweak the focus, and that is also interesting and helpful from time to time. And we also can tweak the white balance in the different settings here, and you see the effect immediately. I have this on auto for the time being. In case you get lost in what a certain setting means or what you can do in a certain section of the camera app, there is an information button here. If you go on that, I'm not turning it now by 90 degrees, but you get the point. You also get a lot of explanations on what you can do here in this particular setting or section of the camera app. If you're on the settings, what I showed before, you can also dig deeper into the menus. Again, I'm not turning this now by 90 degrees, but here you have all the usual settings and a bit more, because that native camera app is, at least in my personal taste, the best I've ever seen on a smartphone. What's also nice is that the shutter sound when you touch the shutter button is a little bit, if you have enough fantasy, imitating the shutter sound of a Leica M camera. So let's try to listen to that. Currently shot at a 200 ISO and 1/100 seconds shutter speed. I think it's the nicest shutter sound I've ever heard on a smartphone, so I like that idea a lot. We also have on that phone here the usual night mode, and the night mode works really, really well. But you can also skip the night mode, where also a lot of computational photography is happening, and go straight away into the manual mode. And I will show this later in the sample images. Night mode works very, very well. This phone basically sees in the dark, but also in the manual mode, which we just looked into, you can basically do exposure bracketing, whatever you want, and the results are just so much mind-blowing compared to what you typically get from a smartphone. We have a portrait mode here, and in the portrait mode we can also tweak the aperture, and that is quite nice. And they intentionally say it with the letter F, which typically stands for aperture, but they don't say aperture, and when you activate it they talk about blur, which indicates that this is computational photography, has nothing to do with the usual hardware aperture in the lens. We also can scan documents, and you get here already some kind of perspective correction here, and if I touch here and pull this up, I get what's typically under others in the other section on other smartphones, and then we have multicam, we have time-lapse, we have slow motion, we have movie effects, we have a super moon setting, which I need to try out next time when we have a full moon in a couple of weeks. We also can set here the setting from the tetra bind 12.5 megapixel to 50 megapixel, and have then the full resolution and no tetra binding takes place. And we have a lot of things we can look into. I think in general interesting is here, of course, the long exposure setting. And I tried this out and I really like it. And I will make one example, namely star trails, later in the sample images, and also show a little animation and a clip. And that works just in a perfect way. You place the smartphone on a tripod, you go into the settings, And if you have a clear night sky, the phone will do its thing and you get very nice star trails, and also for free a little animation video how the star trails proceed over time, all automatically processed in the phone. So all in, this is a really cool camera app, and it is a really cool camera system, and the image quality, which is what interests me most, is fully keeping its promises. That's why we now go into a shooting. I will show a little clip about my shooting scenario here, then we look into the sample images, discuss them in Lightroom, and then I'm going to conclude that slightly longer video. Now I want to show a few sample images, and I've selected a few. I've shot a lot with that Xiaomi 12S Ultra in the last couple of weeks. And the first shot I want to show here is about sharpness. And if you look at that here, this is just very, very good for a smartphone. And I think in general, the way the background is blurred out and the foreground is sharp, that looks really nice to me. Here another example, you could call this a close-up shot. And if I go in here, incredible sharpness, of course. Not the same as if you would shot that image with a macro lens on a Leica M11 with 60 megapixel or on a Fuji GFX100S with 100 megapixel, but for a smartphone, remarkable sharpness, and again in the background a nice blurriness. And I think the smartphone carries over the colors in a very natural way, so compliments here for the smartphone camera. One last example on sharpness, look at that lemon here. This is incredibly sharp, and clearly the optical construction of the lenses, the sensors we have here in the smartphone camera. I think Xiaomi says on their website, at least in China I've seen it, that there are more than 100 optical components built into that camera ensemble, and that looks really, really good. Here an impression about the zoom capabilities of the phone. So this is the ultra wide setting here. Then we have here the wide setting. Then we have the telezoom setting here, 5 times optical zoom. And then with digital zoom, we can go all the time closer to that basketball here. And here, for instance, I think this was a 30 times zoom, looks still very, very good. You see a lot of structure here in the background on the wall. If we go to the next one, it becomes a bit smudgy. And then clearly, if we go to the 120 times zoom we have on that phone, which goes even beyond Samsung's space zoom, which is a 100 times zoom, then it is more like an oil painting and not so much like a photo. But nevertheless, the capabilities and the range you can cover here is absolutely remarkable. Sorry, I was going one image too far. But look at that sequence here. This is ultra wide, and then we get closer and closer and closer. And then we are at the end of story here, what we can achieve. But it's remarkable what you can do here. And I'm really looking forward to use that supermoon feature at the next full moon, which will be in a couple of weeks. And then I will come back to my channel, of course, and to you and show you what this phone is capable of. Since I did a lot of moon shots in the past with the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, for instance, with the Huawei P50 Pro, and also with previous Huawei phones. Previously in the video, we looked into the native camera app and found the portrait mode. And here's a portrait, looks really nice, is pinpoint sharp if I crop into 100%. And the background is very soft and blurry. As I said before, this is software simulation. We have a fixed aperture on these 3 cameras on the smartphone, but it actually looks as if you would have opened your aperture very wide, and is a very nice image. And then if I stop down, and stopping down here is in the meaning of a software simulation, you get more structure in the background, but still a 3-dimensional pop here, and the image is pinpoint sharp where the focus is sitting. Let's talk about dynamic range, and this image here clearly looks as if it would have been taken at the blue hour, but in fact it was already very dark when I took that shot here. And we can see this here if I go in Lightroom into the before and after view, and you see here on the left hand side, that's the image how it came out of camera, and that's the way actually the scene in front of the camera looked. And then in post-processing I was able to recover and pull out of the shadows so much information. Let's crop in here. And you see here there is hardly anything recognizable on the left hand side, but on the right hand side it looks really, really good. Clearly on the barn here you see some noise, which is absolutely normal. if you pull out information of shadows, but it looks really good. If you are conscious about the fact that this is a smartphone and not a Leica M camera or a Leica SL2, then this is a remarkable result in terms of dynamic range. The reason why this works so well with this image is because that's a digital negative, which means a RAW file. And if for the sake of comparison we look at a similar scene with the same lighting, so low light environment, in a JPEG file, we see here on the left hand side how the in-camera processing already was brightening up the image and was doing its processing work. And then a little bit of post-processing by myself on the right hand side gets the scene even brighter and is still a very good result. If you look here a bit closer into the details, it is sometimes looking a bit smudgy, and that is clearly coming from the JPEG processing and is something which is much better looking if you shoot in RAW. So if you really want to get the best out of this camera system on the Xiaomi 12S Ultra, you need to shoot first of all in the Pro app section, and second, you should shoot in RAW, because then the phone really unfolds all of its capabilities. Recovering information out of shadows is one side of dynamic range. Another aspect is recovering information out of highlights. And what you see here on the left-hand side is an image which I intentionally made completely overblown in terms of exposure. So it's a 5-second exposure. I also manually did choose here an ISO of 3200, and it's again a digital negative, so a RAW file. And on the right-hand side, you see what I was able to recover out of these overblown areas here, and that is absolutely remarkable. This is really at the level of a semi-professional DSLR or DSLM. Look at the trees here. Look at the barn here. So much detail, hardly anything recognizable on the image as it came out of camera, but then in post-processing, all of the foreground could nicely be recovered. That is a really good result for a smartphone. Also here in the background, the houses. Now clearly if we go into the background area here, clipping took place, and then it's hopeless. You can't recover information in a clipped image. But in the foreground, where you still have a little bit of information on the out of camera image, you can recover everything, all the details in the foreground, and that is a signal or a sign of very strong dynamic range. But it gets even better. I really wanted to see what I can get out of this phone in the Pro mode, which is the manual shooting mode. So I took 3 frames here. So this is the first frame, underexposed, 1/4 of a second. Then we have here another frame, which is a bit overexposed on the background, but the foreground is nice. This is a 1-second exposure, manually taken. And then one image where I took it to the extreme and exposed the frame to light for 10 seconds. And then I composed them together into an HDR image in Lightroom. And that really is the next level of smartphone photography. And what I did here is called exposure bracketing. Pro photographers use this technique all the way if you have a dark foreground and a very bright background, and so on. So you underexpose, you try to correct expose, then you overexpose, you combine them into one shot. And this image is absolutely mind-blowing. And I show you now the details on the 100% crop. Look at these details. There is no noise in this image. It's absolutely clear. It's brilliant in terms of color representation, and it is pinpoint sharp. So you have here, for instance, on the barn, absolutely no sign of noise. I can even crop in here to 200%. Let me try to do this quickly. So this is now 200%, and this looks really, really good for the lighting which I had in this particular scene. And you get so much detail here in the trees, in the leaves, in the houses. Look at this barn here again and this farmhouse here. So much detail. Is absolutely brilliant what you get here. And again, as a result, you achieve only if you shoot in RAW, so digital negative. And then, of course, if you apply certain techniques, like here, for instance, exposure bracketing. But the level of this image, given how dark the scene was, is really at the same level as what you could achieve with a DSLR or a DSLM. The very last thing I wanted to show what you can do with this smartphone is photos of the night sky. And this is clearly a terrific image. If you look into that, pinpoint sharp stars, almost no noise, really nice colors, and I like a lot what I see here. And I mentioned before, when we looked into the native camera app, that you can do star trails with that smartphone, and that there is a dedicated section in this pull-up menu where you can go on long exposures. You just put the phone on a tripod and let it do its thing. And that is one of the frames which came out of that. And then here you see even more details. Very, very nice here. This is post-processed already, but this is an absolutely fantastic image for a smartphone. I've tested so many smartphones for night photography. The iPhone 13 Pro Max and its previous iPhone versions, and the Huawei P50 Pro and the Samsung S22 Ultra, and now I'm currently testing the Samsung Z Fold 4, but never I've seen a smartphone delivering such an image of the night sky. This is absolutely mind-blowing, and clearly, of course, is probably due to that expertise Leica injected into the Xiaomi 12S Ultra, plus a 1-inch sensor from Sony, plus a lot of software, which is of course reflecting color science, calibration, image processing, and all of that from Leica, Xiaomi, and with Sony technology. And that provides absolutely stunning images. This is something I can achieve with my full frame Nikon cameras or Sony cameras or Canon cameras or the Leica SL2 or whatsoever, but I would have never expected that an image like this comes out of a smartphone. And here is the final star trail image, and I also want to show quickly at the end the clip, which is automatically compiled from the Xiaomi 12S Ultra when you go for the star trail mode, and then I want to conclude the video. That's it. That's all I wanted to say and show here, and I hope you liked that video. And for pro photographers, the Xiaomi 12S Ultra clearly is the best smartphone you can currently have. I tested them all, I've shot them all. This is the best, period. And a video like this is a lot of work, so if you want to support my channel and the content I'm providing, please subscribe. Please like the video, and please hit the notification bell to stay tuned on my content. And of course, what I'm always saying at the end of my videos on my channel, thanks for watching, stay safe and healthy, and of course, peace out.